When Emily Peterson first saw the 5 German shepherds huddled in the far corner of her grandfather's barn, something inside her, something only a 6-year-old could still recognize, told her this wasn't just about lost pets. The biggest dog stood between her and another that lay barely moving on a bed of blood-speckled hay. A deep scar crossed his face like a war map, muzzle to eye, making him look dangerous. But his growl wasn't a threat. It was a promise. "You'll have to go through me first." Emily's hand trembled as she spotted the shredded metal tags dangling from 2 of their collars. She didn't know much about the world yet, but she'd seen pictures of those symbols in her grandfather's old footlocker. Military tags. The smallest one whimpered softly, and as he shifted, Emily could see the healed-over wounds all along his body. Not bite marks, not farm injuries. Something else. Something colder. Trained. That's when the black SUV rolled slowly past the gate at the edge of the property. Its tinted windows reflected the fading sunlight like obsidian eyes. The dogs tensed. In unison, Emily stepped back, heart pounding. But instead of screaming or running, she whispered, "I won't tell anyone. I promise." That promise would change everything. The Peterson family farm sat about 20 miles outside Oak Ridge, Kentucky, just a name on a map to most people. But to Emily, it was the whole world. 60 acres of sloping fields, flaking fences, and a red barn that creaked in the wind like it was whispering secrets. Autumn had thrown its whole heart into the land, maples glowing like fire, their leaves carpeting the gravel driveway in rusty reds and oranges. Emily didn't remember much about life before the farm. Her mother's accident had taken all that. A head-on crash on Route 40 that people still talked about in quiet voices. Since then, the farm had been her only world, and her only anchor. She was small for her age, with wild blonde curls and eyes, too serious for someone who still couldn't tie her shoes. She rarely spoke above a whisper anymore. Her only friends were the characters she drew in her sketchbook, girls with wings, dogs with armor. Her grandfather called her his little mystery. Frank Peterson, Pop to Emily, was a man carved out of old stories and Vietnam steel. At 72, he still woke before dawn, still wore the same kind of flannel every day, and still made Emily eggs, toast, and a glass of milk every morning, never varying the routine. Discipline, he said, was the only kind of magic a man could count. Her father, Robert, was a ghost. Not dead, just always gone. His 18-wheeler kept him on the road 25 days a month. The house got postcards. Emily didn't. That old barn used to hold horses. Now it was just shadows and dust. Or so they thought. What Emily found that night would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. It started with a whisper, in the dark. "I brought you food," and 5 pairs of eyes glinting like coals rising from the hay to meet hers. Some stories don't start with thunder. They start with quiet footsteps, a slice of leftover meatloaf wrapped in a napkin, and a little girl walking straight into a war she didn't know existed. Emily waited until the last of Pop's snores echoed through the house like slow waves rolling against the walls. She counted 10 of them, just to be sure, then slipped one foot onto the cold floor, followed by the other. The clock blinked 11:42 p.m. in soft red digits. Her breath came in tiny clouds as she pulled on her favorite rubber boots, 2 sizes too big, and tiptoed toward the kitchen. She didn't need a flashlight. The moon was bright enough, painting silver ribbons across the kitchen floor and out, onto the gravel beyond. Inside her coat pocket was a folded napkin holding 3 chunks of leftover meatloaf, just enough for a peace offering. She had saved it from dinner, slipping it into her lap when Pop wasn't looking. The stairs creaked. One by one they sang under her weight, but Emily froze after each step, listening, still snoring. Good. Outside, the air bit her cheeks, sharper than it had been the night before. The wind rustled the dying cornstalks and rattled the metal gate. The sky looked too big for a little girl to walk under alone. But Emily wasn't afraid. Not exactly. Something bigger than fear had taken hold of her. The barn door groaned as she pushed it open. Just wide enough. Just enough for her to slip through and vanish into the dark. It smelled of hay and rust and something new, something living. She paused just inside, heart thudding in her ears. "I brought you food," she whispered. At first, nothing. Then, soft movement. The shuffle of paws over packed dirt, a breath, a low, almost inaudible whine. The scarred dog stepped out from the shadows first. Commander. Emily had named him after watching how the others deferred to him. The way he placed himself between danger and the wounded. The way he looked straight, through her like he was evaluating not what she was, but who. He approached slowly, his amber eyes glowing. Emily extended the napkin in her trembling palm. She kept her gaze steady, like Pop had taught her when catching injured birds. Commander. Stopped a foot away, sniffed the air, then carefully took the meatloaf from her hand. Not a snap, not a grab, just a slow, deliberate motion as if he was accepting a contract. He turned and retreated to the back corner, to the white-gray dog curled up in the hay, Ghost. Emily stepped forward just enough to see all of them now. 5 dogs in total. She whispered their names almost without realizing it. Commander, the leader, scarred and sure. Scout, twitchy with one torn ear, always moving. Shadow, pure black and silent as smoke. Ranger, big, steady, always. Watching the others. Ghost, the white one, broken and barely holding on. Ghost wouldn't eat the first night. He didn't even lift his head. But the others came, slowly, cautiously, until the food was gone. Emily sat down cross-legged in the straw and just watched. She didn't try to touch them. She didn't speak again. Her presence was enough. The next night, she brought half a chicken breast she'd hidden beneath her mashed potatoes. The third night, she smuggled leftover stew in a Ziploc bag. Each time, the dogs emerged sooner, came closer. Ghost began to lift his head when he saw her, his eyes still haunted, but awake now. She started bringing her sketchbook, drawing them by moonlight, rough shapes, big paws, watchful eyes. She didn't realize how much she was learning, how they moved in sync, how they never all slept at once, how they listened to every sound beyond the barn walls. One night, Scout froze in place as a distant vehicle rumbled past. All 5 dogs turned toward the same corner of the barn. Emily held her breath. Nothing happened, but the air felt tighter. After that, by the 4th night, she could approach Ghost. She knelt near him, laying out his piece of meat gently on the straw. "You have sad eyes," she whispered. "Like my dad's when he doesn't think anyone is looking." Ghost whimpered softly, not in pain, more like recognition. His bandages, makeshift ones Emily had torn from old pillowcases, were starting to smell. His fur was clumping around the wounds. Infection. Even she could tell. She wanted to ask Pop for help. But she remembered what the dogs had done when that black SUV passed, the way Commander had stepped in front of Ghost, the way they all went, still, and the way she had whispered without knowing why, "I won't tell anyone." That promise had weight now, like the collar she'd seen on Commander, the tattered patch. The words K9 Sauji barely legible beneath the grime. She didn't know what it meant, not really, but she felt it mattered, that these weren't just dogs, they were survivors. She was too young to understand the full story, but old enough to know what it means when something is hiding in plain sight, when a growl isn't a warning but a plea. Protect us. So she did, every night. Until one morning, as she gathered eggs from the chicken coop, she heard the barn door creak open behind her, and she knew Pop had found them. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the hills when Emily's world cracked open. She was in the chicken coop, small hands reaching into the nest box, when she heard the sound, the unmistakable creak of the barn door opening. Not wide, but enough. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, her boots crunching against the straw. Across the yard, framed by the rising light and morning fog, stood Frank Pop Peterson, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes locked on the red barn like he was staring down ghosts from another lifetime. "Emily Jean Peterson," he said, his voice deep and steady, but with a tightness she'd only heard once before, when the call came about her mother's accident. "You want to tell me why there are 5 military-grade German shepherds in my barn?" The egg basket slipped from her hands, crashing against the coop's wooden floor, yolks spilling like silent confessions. She ran to him, not away but toward, tears already slipping from the corners of her eyes. She didn't have a speech prepared. Just the truth, in the only voice she had left. "Please don't make them leave, Pop," she begged, clutching the edge of his flannel shirt like a lifeline. "They're hurt and scared, and they didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't mean to lie. I just knew they needed help." Frank didn't yell. He didn't speak. Just stood there, eyes scanning the barn, jaw working back and forth like he was chewing something bitter. Then he held up a calloused hand. "Show me." It was a sentence that weighed more than it should, and Emily, still crying, nodded. She led him across the yard, boots squelching in the dewy grass, her hands clenched into fists. She expected the worst, expected yelling, maybe even the pound. But when they reached the barn and she slid open the door, something unexpected happened. The dogs didn't run. They didn't hide. Commander stepped forward, posture alert but not aggressive. Frank stopped, eyes narrowing. He scanned the space. The hay, the makeshift bed Ghost was curled on, the others forming a loose half-circle, ready to act. Then he did something Emily didn't expect. He knelt. It took effort. His knees popped, and a low grunt escaped him, but he went down slowly, extending one hand palm down toward Commander. Commander approached, not fast, not slow, like a soldier checking rank. He sniffed the hand, then made a small movement with his head. Not quite a nod, but not nothing. "Well, I'll be damned," Frank muttered. "This ain't no stray." He moved to inspect the others. Quiet, methodical, like he'd done this before, like it was muscle memory. Emily hovered at his side, silent, watching him kneel beside Ghost. The dog's side was inflamed, the wounds angry and unhealed. Frank's expression darkened. "This one's got infection," he said. "Needs a vet." Emily's voice came out as a whisper. "Are you gonna call the pound?" Frank didn't answer right away. He reached for Commander's collar, turned, the broken tag over in his palm. The letters were almost worn away, but still there. "No," he said finally. "But we need help. Someone who won't ask too many questions." Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived that afternoon in her mud-splattered pickup. Emily had seen her before at the county fair. She was the vet who always smiled at children, even when she was elbow-deep in a goat. But today, her smile faltered as she stepped into the barn. "When you said emergency, Frank," she began, "I expected colic, or maybe a rogue bull. Not—" Her voice trailed off. Frank gestured toward Ghost. "Can you help?" Mitchell knelt, all professionalism now. Her hands moved fast, gentle. Emily watched her expression change as she examined Ghost's wounds. Her brow furrowed. Her mouth tightened. "These aren't ordinary injuries," she said, her voice low. "This dog's been in combat, and this microchip—" She glanced at Emily, then back at Frank. "Specialized." Frank nodded. "Thought so. The way they move, the way they post up, reminds me of the dogs in Nam." Mitchell looked him in the eye. "These dogs are worth hundreds of thousands. Someone's looking for them." Frank's jaw clenched. Someone already is. Emily saw a black SUV, tinted windows, just watching. Mitchell finished treating Ghost. Antibiotics, fresh dressings. Then she cleaned Scout's ear and Ranger's bruised shoulder. All business. But when it was done, she stood, arms crossed. "I'm legally required to report dogs with traceable chips." Frank's eyes didn't blink. "Sarah, your daddy and I served together. These dogs didn't end up here by accident. Give me 3 days, that's all I ask." 3 seconds passed, then she nodded. 3 days. As her truck disappeared down the gravel path, Emily stepped out from behind the barn door, where she'd been hiding, sketchbook clutched to her chest. "Are they soldier dogs, Pop?" Frank looked down at her, his face unreadable for a long moment. Something like that, Pumpkin. That evening as they made dinner, eggs and toast just like always, the television flickered in the corner. The local news. A drug bust gone wrong in Tennessee, the anchor said. 3 officers killed, including K9 handlers. The screen showed an emblem, a tactical unit. Frank froze, spatula in midair. The emblem matched the one on Commander's collar. Everything changed in that moment. The past came roaring back, and Emily's quiet promise, "I won't tell anyone," became something else entirely. It became a mission. The first thing Dr. Sarah Mitchell said when she stepped out of her truck the next morning was, "I had a bad feeling all night." She didn't wait for Frank to respond, just grabbed her veterinary bag and marched toward the barn. Emily trailed behind her quietly, a solemn little shadow. She had barely spoken since the night before, when the news report confirmed what none of them had dared say out loud. The dogs in her grandfather's barn weren't strays. They were survivors. Soldiers. Something bigger. Inside the barn, the air smelled of fresh hay and antiseptic from the previous day's treatment. The dogs didn't bark. They never did. They watched. Commander stood in his usual place near the center, where he could see all angles of approach. Shadow lay motionless near the loft, but Emily knew he wasn't asleep. Ranger's head lifted as Sarah approached, but he didn't move. Otherwise, only Ghost stirred. He lifted his head, and for the first time his tail gave a single, tentative wag. Sarah knelt beside him. Her hands moved gently over the fresh bandages she'd applied yesterday. When she peeled one back, she hissed through her teeth. "These wounds aren't healing like they should," she said softly. "Too deep, too dirty. Like he was pulled through barbed wire or worse." Frank crouched beside her. "That's because he didn't just get hurt, he was escaping something." She looked up sharply. "Frank, what are you saying?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the metal tags they'd removed from Ranger's collar. "Look at the engraving." Sarah took it, squinting at the worn surface. "Alpha Team K9 SOG, Tactical Operations Group." She looked up at him. "This is military, high level." Frank nodded. Wilson confirmed it. "These dogs were part of a special operations team that went dark in Tennessee." "You mean the drug bust?" "Wasn't just a bust, it was a hit. 3 handlers killed. Dogs listed as KIA, but they didn't die. They ran." Sarah leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Frank, if that's true, someone is going to come looking." "Already have," Frank said. "Emily saw an SUV 2 nights ago, blacked out windows. Just watching." Sarah didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled a small scanner from her bag. She moved it over Ghost's side. A sharp beep. "Found his chip," she said, then frowned. "That's odd." "What?" "It's encrypted, not just tagged for location or medical history. This one's locked." Frank's eyes narrowed. "What kind of dog has a chip you need clearance to read?" Sarah stood. "The kind that isn't just trained, the kind that carries information." They were silent for a long moment. "Frank," she said at last, "legally I'm obligated to report this." "I know. And I'm already in deep just by treating them." "I know. But I also know what these dogs are, what they've been through. I saw Ghost's eyes last night in my sleep. I dreamed he was trying to speak, like there was something inside him that needed to come out." Frank looked at her carefully. "You're not the only one who's been dreaming." He nodded toward Emily, who sat across the barn sketching in her notebook. She hadn't drawn flowers or trees or ponies. She was drawing a man in tactical gear, his face kind, kneeling beside Ghost. The detail was uncanny. The patch on the uniform, the same emblem from Commander's collar. K9 SUG. Sarah knelt beside Emily, speaking gently. "Sweetheart, who is this man?" Emily looked up with solemn eyes. "I don't know his name, but he's Ghost's person. Have you seen him before?" Emily shook her head. "Only in dreams. Ghost shows me. Sarah exchanged a look with Frank. How much does she know? Only what they've shown her. You think it's real? I think she sees more than we do. Sarah stood again. We don't have much time. These dogs need shelter, medical care, and if they're carrying classified information. Frank walked toward the tack room. There's more. From a drawer beneath a pile of old saddle blankets, he pulled out Commander's collar. Not the new one, the old one, torn and faded. He cut into the lining with a pocket knife. From inside, he pulled a small black object, a waterproof micro USB drive. Sarah stared. That's what they came with. Frank nodded. And maybe what got their handlers killed. He held it like it might burn him. I need to make a call. Frank stepped into the house and closed the kitchen door behind him. The phone on the wall still worked, barely. He picked it up and dialed a number from memory. 3 rings. Wilson, came the gruff voice. It's Peterson, Frank said. A pause. Well, I'll be. Sergeant Peterson. Been a long time. Frank didn't waste time. I've got something. 5 dogs, Special Ops, Tennessee. I need to know what's going on. Another pause. Longer. You've got Alpha Team, Wilson said. Frank's grip tightened. So they are military? Not just military, Wilson said. They're the most advanced tactical K-9 unit ever trained. Narcotics detection, VIP protection, covert recon. Those dogs are witnesses, Frank. Something about that bust went sideways, real bad. The location was classified. You saying it was an inside job. I'm saying there's a reason they ran. And if they found your farm, it wasn't by accident. Your service record still on file? Frank looked out the window toward the barn. Emily sat beside Ghost, humming softly as she drew. What do I do? Sit tight. Don't trust anyone. Not even the badge. I'll call in a team I trust. Frank hung up. Outside, a cloud of dust appeared at the edge of the drive. A silver truck. A man stepping out with sunglasses and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Afternoon, he said, approaching the porch. Name's Clyde Barrow. Just bought the Miller place down the road. Thought I'd introduce myself. Frank nodded but didn't extend his hand. Something wasn't right. And deep in the barn, Commander raised his head. His ears turned forward. His eyes locked onto the war, it seemed, had come to Kentucky, and the dogs weren't done fighting yet. Frank couldn't stop staring at the tiny object in his palm. The micro USB drive was smaller than a matchstick, wrapped in a rubber casing designed for extreme conditions. Waterproof, shockproof, like the dogs who carried it. He didn't plug, and he didn't need to. He already knew this wasn't just evidence, it was a message, a final order. When those dogs were trained to follow long after their handlers had died. He returned to the kitchen and tucked it into an envelope marked tax receipts, an old soldier's instinct. Hide something important where no one would look. Then he picked up the phone again. It rang once before being answered. Wilson. It's worse than you said, Frank said. There's a drive, hidden in the collar, still intact, a long exhale on the other end. Peterson, listen to me. That's not just training data. Those dogs were part of a classified operation. They weren't just sniffing out drugs. They were protecting a witness, and something went wrong. I saw the news, Frank said. They said it was a bust. 3 officers dead. No mention of witnesses. Wilson's voice dropped to a whisper. Because the witness didn't make it, and the case they were building, it goes all the way to Washington. Frank's hand tightened around the phone. You think someone on the inside gave them up? I don't think, Wilson said. I know, the ambush in Tennessee, it was no accident. Location was top secret. Only a handful of people knew. The handlers were killed before they could extract. And the dogs? Escaped. Injured. Probably split up. But if they got to you, it means they followed fallback protocols. They followed Ghost. That one. Wilson paused. He was bonded to the lead handler, deeply. They called him the empath. If anyone could bring the rest home, it'd be him. Frank glanced out the window. Ghost lay next to Emily in the grass, his muzzle resting gently on her thigh as she... Drew? The image was almost peaceful, but something inside Frank wouldn't settle. And Emily, he said slowly, she's seeing things, drawing things, things she can't possibly know. Kids are sensitive, Wilson replied. More than we give them credit for. No, it's more than that. She drew the handler, same patch on the uniform, same face I saw in the news footage, only she's never seen him before. You think the dog is showing her? I think Ghost is trying to finish what his person started. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily helped her grandfather prepare dinner. She didn't speak much, but she kept looking toward the barn. Ghost hadn't eaten. Again. Frank tried not to let it show, but his frustration was growing. Not at her, never at her, at the situation. At how deep the danger ran. At how many answers still lay just out of reach. He flipped the switch on the old radio mounted under the cabinet. Breaking news tonight out of Nashville, the anchor said. DEA sources now confirming that last week's failed drug operation in Franklin County may be linked to a larger criminal enterprise. Frank froze. Spatula in midair. Investigation ongoing. But sources claim internal corruption may have compromised the operation. 3 officers were killed, including 2 canine handlers. The dogs were presumed dead. No comment from the agency. Frank turned off the radio. Emily looked up from her drawing. Pop, Pop. Just thinking, Pumpkin. About Mom? Frank's chest tightened. Emily rarely spoke of her mother, and when she did, it always cut deeper than he expected. I think about her every day, he said gently. She told me once, Emily said, still focused on her paper, that she worked with animals who helped people tell the truth. Frank blinked. She said that, She said some animals can feel what people won't say, that they carry things people are too scared to. Frank swallowed hard. He hadn't known much about Laura's job at the time of her death. An analyst, they said. Background checks. Database. It's work. He'd believed it. But now, could she have been working with the same task force? Could this have gone deeper than any of them realized? Later that night, Frank sat on the back porch, the USB drive once again in his hand. He called Wilson. You said the handlers were protecting a witness. What kind of witness? One with documents, Wilson said. Digital evidence, names, account numbers, wire transfers, everything. He was supposed to testify in front of a federal grand jury. The dogs were there to extract him and the data safely. And he never made it out. But the dogs did, with the drive, possibly, or with memory of where to find it. These K9 units, especially Alpha Team, are trained to identify and recover objects, not just people. It's possible one of them located the drive after the handlers were down. Frank looked toward the barn. Commander. Of course, the dog hadn't just survived. He had retrieved. They knew they couldn't trust anyone, Frank muttered. So, they trusted the dogs. And now the wrong people are looking, Wilson warned. Sheriffs, feds, even cartels. That farm of yours just became a front line. Frank ended the call. The next morning, Frank waited until Emily got on the school bus before retrieving the torn collar from the barn. The insignia on the tag, K9. Soji gleamed in the morning sun. He traced it with his thumb. Memories surged. Da Nang, a minefield. The moment a dog had stopped him from stepping forward. Back then, the dog had no name. Just a handler who whispered to him like he was made of glass. Now, Frank thought, the ghosts have names. He picked up the phone once more. This time, the voice that answered wasn't Wilson's. Tactical K9 Division, Master Sergeant Wilson, speaking. Wilson, Frank said. It's Peterson again. I've got 5 of your dogs, 1 barely alive, and someone's looking for them. A pause. Jesus Christ, Peterson, Wilson breathed. You've got Alpha Team. Frank's knuckles whitened. So this is bigger than Tennessee, much bigger. The dogs were witnesses to something that got their handlers killed. There's an internal investigation happening, but off the books. The ambush should have been impossible. Only one conclusion. Frank said it aloud. Someone sold them out. And if they think the dogs are alive, Wilson replied. They'll come, and they won't knock. Frank looked to the horizon. They're already here. Frank was up before sunrise. Not that he'd slept much. He stepped into the barn with a quiet purpose, carrying a canvas duffel that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The dogs were already awake, always awake. Ranger stood at the main door, ears twitching with every rustle of the wind. Scout paced in small arcs near the rear wall. Commander lay like a sphinx near Ghost, who still hadn't regained full mobility. Frank knelt near a pile of old tires and tapped his fingers against the concrete floor. All right, boys, he muttered. Time we got to work. From the duffel, he pulled out relics, a dog whistle, faded but functional, laminated cards with hand signals, and a dog-eared training manual with the U.S. Army emblem embossed on the cover. Inside, penciled notes from the 70s curled at the corners like dry leaves. Emily stood at the barn door, clutching a crayon and watching. What are you doing? Pop, pop. Frank didn't look up. They need structure, pumpkin, muscle memory. This ain't just feeding and first aid anymore. These dogs are waiting for orders. He whistled once, short and low. Commander's ears perked immediately. Frank raised 2 fingers in a quick arc, then pointed toward the far end of the barn. Commander moved, not just moved, executed. He flowed across the barn floor with precise efficiency, circling the old hay bales, halting exactly where Frank pointed and freezing in place like a statue. Good boy, Frank said, voice firm but respectful. He repeated the sequence with each dog. Shadow glided silently across the rafters, weaving between beams like smoke. Scout tracked a scent trail Frank had planted with an old shirt, nose to the ground, tail high with focus. Ranger obeyed complex physical commands, performing flanks and defensive turns like a canine linebacker, and Ghost stayed still, watching unmoving. Frank didn't push him, not yet. Emily approached quietly, her crayon now tucked behind her ear like a pencil. They remember, don't they? They remember everything, Frank said. These dogs weren't just trained, they were bonded. You don't unlearn that kind of discipline. But Ghost doesn't want to play, she whispered. Frank nodded. That's okay, he's still healing. Sometimes the body takes longer to catch up to the heart. Emily frowned, then turned back toward Ghost. She sat near him, crisscross applesauce, and pulled her notebook into her lap. As the others continued running drills, she sketched. She didn't draw dogs this time. She drew soldiers, men and women, some smiling, some not, always with dogs beside them, always with the same emblem on their shoulders. By noon, the barn had transformed. Makeshift agility tracks spanned the floor, overturned buckets for hurdles, old wood planks for balance walks, hay bales stacked for climb and hold positions. Frank stood with his arms crossed, watching as Commander responded to a silent whistle with a quick sprint and freeze maneuver. The fluidity was military, flawless. He was impressed and haunted. Watching them brought back faces he hadn't thought of in years, faces from rice paddies and jungle mist, names carved into the black granite wall in Washington, names he had tried to forget. He found himself reaching for a cigarette he hadn't smoked in 15 years. Instead, he reached for the whistle again. This time, he looked at Ghost. Nothing. Then again, slower. A flicker. The dog's ears shifted. Frank lowered the whistle and knelt, pressing his palm against the floor. I know what you are, he said softly. I was there too. You lose a partner like that, it doesn't just heal, it changes how you breathe. Ghost didn't move. But we don't have the luxury of silence anymore, Frank added. They're coming, and I need all 5 of you. Ready? Ghost's eyes met his. Then, slowly, the dog rose. He limped at first. His back legs trembled. But he took 3 steps, then 4. He passed Commander. Then, without a sound, he dropped into a crouch, his eyes scanning the room, body tense, a defensive posture. Protective. Frank gave a slow nod. Welcome back, soldier. That evening, Dr. Mitchell returned. She didn't park near the house this time. She drove directly to the barn and came in with quiet steps. Emily greeted her with a shy smile and a drawing. It was Ghost, but in this one he wasn't wounded. He stood on a rooftop next to a man in a vest labeled FBI. A helicopter hovered in the background. The man's face was obscured, but there was something noble about his stance, something real. "Did Ghost show you this?" Sarah asked. Emily nodded. They were helping someone important. The man gave Ghost something shiny before he got shot. Sarah stared at the drawing, her mouth slightly open. "It's the drive," Frank said behind her. She turned. "You're sure?" Wilson confirmed. "The dogs were trained to recover evidence. If this one has it, they'll stop at nothing." Sarah lowered her voice. "And if Emily knows, if she's dreaming things like this, we can't protect her." "Here." Frank looked toward the barn window, where dusk was settling in soft blue waves across the horizon. "I've already made arrangements," he said. "If anything happens, there's a place, a cabin, one they don't know about." Sarah put a hand on his arm. "You're a good man, Frank." He didn't smile. "Just tired of watching people I love become targets." Later, after Emily had gone to bed and the barn had gone still, Frank sat alone at the kitchen table. The micro USB drive lay before him, untouched. He didn't need to see what was on it to know the truth. Whatever the contents, it had the power to topple men in suits who thought they were untouchable. And those men? They were coming, but they hadn't counted on Commander or Ghost or a 6-year-old girl with drawings that spoke louder than words. Frank looked out the window one last time before turning off the lights, and in the darkness beyond the glass, 5 sets of eyes glowed quietly back, waiting. The silver pickup truck rolled down the gravel driveway like it belonged there. Slow, casual, too casual. Frank Peterson stood on the porch with his arms crossed, watching as the vehicle pulled up beside the reflective mailbox that still read Peterson, Family Farm. The man who stepped out was in his 40s, lean, clean-shaven, with aviator sunglasses and a slight limp he tried to hide. "Afternoon," the man said, flashing a practiced smile. "Name's Clyde Barrow. Just bought the Miller place down the road, thought I'd introduce myself." Frank didn't shake his hand. He didn't move at all. "Miller place has been empty since spring," Frank said. "You moving in alone?" "Yep." "Just me and some boxes," Clyde replied. "Fixer-upper, but I like quiet places." Frank said nothing, just tilted his head slightly. Clyde's eyes drifted toward the red barn behind the house. "You still do any farming?" "Some chickens." "Big garden, that's enough. Ever keep dogs?" Clyde asked, tone too casual. Frank's jaw tightened slightly. "Not for a long time." "Funny," Clyde said. "I saw some prints near the property line. Big ones. Shepherds, I think." "Coyotes," Frank said flatly. "They pass through. Sometimes." "Right," Clyde said. But his smile didn't fade. "Well, if you ever need anything, neighbor, I'm just down the road." As Clyde returned to his truck and drove off, Frank waited until the dust had settled before moving. Then he walked straight to the barn. Inside, the dogs were alert. Commander stood at attention. Shadow had already moved to the side entrance. Ranger paced like he'd sensed something off. "They didn't buy it," Frank muttered. He looked at Emily, who sat sketching on a bale of hay. "Pumpkin," he said gently. "You remember the hiding game we practiced during tornado season?" Emily looked up. "The one in the storm cellar?" "That's the one." "Why, Pop? Frank knelt beside her, his voice low. "Because some people lie with their mouths, and others lie with their eyes. But the worst kind?" He looked toward the road where the truck had disappeared. "They lie with kindness." The next day, Clyde returned, this time with a 6-pack of beer balanced on one palm and a smile that looked chiseled from glass. "Thought you might want a cold one," he said, placing the 6-pack on the fence post. "Bit early for me," Frank replied, not bothering to hide the suspicion in his tone. Clyde shrugged. "To each his own." His eyes swept over the yard, resting briefly on the school bus stop near the end of the driveway. "Saw the bus drop off your girl yesterday? She yours or your son's?" "Granddaughter," Frank said. "Nice to have family around." Clyde. "Ghost? Don't have much of that myself. There was a pause, then Clyde asked, "Still hearing those coyotes at night?" Frank didn't blink. "They get vocal this time of year." Right, Clyde said, then gestured toward Frank. And that's a military ring, isn't it? You serve?" "Vietnam," Frank replied, curt. Clyde nodded. Always had respect for military dogs, loyal to the end. The comment hung in the air like a baited hook. Frank didn't bite. "Most dogs are loyal," he said, "if you treat them right." Clyde tipped an imaginary hat. "Well, you take care now, neighbor." This time, Frank didn't wait for the dust to settle. He went inside, pulled out his old flip phone, and called Wilson. "I need a background check," Frank said. "Clyde Barrow. Just moved into the Miller place. He's too interested in dogs for someone who claims to be a neighbor." Wilson responded immediately. "I'll see what I can find." Then added, "In the meantime, keep a low profile. Something's moving on our end, too." That evening, as the wind picked up and leaves danced across the porch, Emily sat on the floor of the living room coloring. Frank watched her from his chair, the shotgun leaning against the wall beside him. "Pop, pop," she said, not looking up. "Ghost says that man isn't who he says he is." Frank's blood ran cold. "Ghost told you that?" Emily nodded. "He doesn't bark when the man's truck comes near. He freezes, like he's remembering something bad." Frank stood and walked to the window, peering out into the dusk. "You think he's one of the bad men?" Emily didn't answer right away. Then she pointed to her drawing. It was Clyde, but behind him were shadows shaped like men with guns. "He has friends," she said quietly. "And they're coming." The next morning, as Frank fed the chickens, he noticed tire tracks in the dirt, fresh ones, right along the fence line. Not from Clyde's truck, different treads. He followed them, walking slow, heart sinking. They led toward the barn, and then away again. Someone had circled the property during the night. He called Wilson again. "We've got movement," Frank said. "Tracks along the barn, SUV tires." "I'm betting Clyde isn't who he says he is," Wilson cursed. "The FBI team scheduled to pick up the dogs? We can't verify their credentials. Something's off." Frank's stomach turned. "You think Clyde's part of it?" "I think you've got a mole in your neighborhood, and if the drive's still in your possession, they'll come for it." Frank hung up. Then he walked to the barn. Inside, the dogs were tense. Commander met his eyes, and in that wordless exchange, Frank gave the only order that mattered: prepare, because war had come to their doorstep, and the only way out was through it. Frank stood on the porch, staring at the two black SUVs pulling up the long dirt driveway. They didn't belong here. They were too polished, too black. Like corporate predators pretending to be lawmen. Two men stepped out. Dark suits, badges flashed, not waved, flashed like a performance they'd practiced. The taller one wore reflective sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. The shorter one had a military buzz cut and the kind of gait that told Frank, not FBI, not clean anyway. "Frank Peterson?" the taller one asked. Frank didn't answer. The second man stepped forward. "We're with the Bureau, Federal Investigation. We received an anonymous tip about a possible animal welfare situation. Dogs, unregistered, dangerous breeds." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You brought 2 SUVs and 4 agents for a welfare check?" The taller man smirked. "We take these calls seriously." Emily watched from inside the screen door, her fingers curled tight around the curtain. Ghost sat beside her. He didn't move, didn't growl, didn't blink. He just stared through the mesh at the men in black. Commander stood behind Frank, silent, stiff, like a statue carved from war and instinct. "You got a warrant?" Frank asked. The buzz-cut man stepped closer. "We can get one, but this would go a lot easier if you just let us see the animals." Frank didn't move. "That your badge number?" He pointed to the ID clipped to the man's belt. The man didn't look down. "It's a standard federal ID." "I didn't ask that," Frank said. The silence stretched. The man in sunglasses finally spoke. "We're not here to cause trouble," Frank replied, voice low, hard. "You already did." 10 minutes later, Wilson called back. Peterson, listen carefully, he said, voice clipped. The Bureau didn't send anyone today. That badge number, it's fake. And I traced Clyde Barrow. Frank tightened his grip on the phone. And? There's no Clyde Barrow listed in Kentucky property records, but there is a man by that name who died in 2012 in Arizona. Stolen identity. Frank looked out the window where the SUVs still idled like patient wolves, I figured. There's more, Wilson said. The dogs aren't just witnesses. They were part of an encrypted data transmission program. Each of them carries pieces of biometric encryption. Physical memory. Commander, he's the keystone. Frank turned away from the window. The what? Think of them like a living puzzle, Wilson said. Each one holds a fragment of a security key, but only when they're together can the full data be accessed. The handlers built them that way. Fail safe against betrayal. And Commander? He carries the final piece. The drive is useless without him, and he won't release the signal unless... Unless what? Frank whispered, unless he believes he's safe. Frank looked toward Emily. She was outside now, crouching beside Ghost near the edge of the barn, her small hand resting on his shoulder. And there's one more thing, Wilson added. Frank could hear him hesitate. What? The handler commander, bonded with the one who programmed the encryption key into his behavior matrix was Laura. Frank's blood went cold. My daughter? She was more than a database analyst. She worked Black Ops communication security for the DOJ. She embedded with Alpha Team the last 6 months of her life. Frank staggered backward, breath caught in his throat. They told us she died in a crash. She did, Wilson said, but we believe she was being targeted because she knew too much. Inside the barn, Commander approached Emily. She wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking. She was just sitting there, quiet as snowfall, stroking the scar on his snout with slow, deliberate movements. Then she whispered something only Commander could hear, and the dog stood. For the first time since arriving on the farm, he walked to the middle of the barn and sat. Perfect posture. Waiting. Frank entered, eyes still. Glassy from what he'd just heard. Emily turned to him. Pop, he's ready. Ready for what? He wants you to have this. She handed Frank the original collar. He turned it over and found something new beneath the lining. Not just the USB drive, but a sequence of etched numbers, a biometric code. Jesus, Frank muttered. Commander looked at him, and for a moment, it felt like looking into a memory that had waited a long time to surface. She embedded the passkey, Frank whispered. She programmed it to respond to Emily. Emily smiled faintly. Mom always said dogs can feel things that people won't. Say. Outside, the men in black returned. This time they didn't knock. They marched toward the barn, one hand on their hips, too close to holsters for Frank's comfort. He didn't wait. He stepped outside. Stay where you are, he said, voice sharp. Sir, we're authorized to inspect. You step 1 foot in that barn, Frank said, raising the shotgun now. You're gonna need more than authorization. They hesitated. Commander barked once, a signal. From the corners of the property, the other dogs emerged. Scout from the tree line, Ranger from under the porch, Shadow from the roof of the barn, surrounding, positioning. Buzzcut reached for his pistol, but Frank beat him, not with bullets, with words. Laura programmed them, he said. They'll only respond to truth. And you two? You smell like secrets. The man flinched. Then, a new vehicle arrived. A black SUV, but this one bore the real badge. Wilson stepped out. Gray hair, hard eyes. A badge that wasn't flashed, but worn. You're both done here, Wilson said. The fake agents froze. Names? He asked. They didn't answer, didn't think so. 2 real agents stepped out behind him. The fakes tried to run, they didn't get far. Ranger took one down with a shoulder tackle that made the ground shake. Commander stood beside Frank, unmoving. Wilson approached him slowly. You've been holding the line, Peterson. Frank nodded once. Just doing what I was taught. Wilson crouched beside Emily. You okay, kid? She nodded, then looked up and said, "Ghost is scared. He says there's still more coming." Wilson's face darkened. "She's right." He turned to Frank. This was just the storm's edge. Began with a single drone. No louder than a wasp, it drifted overhead at 3:27 a.m. Commander heard it first. He let out a low growl. Not a warning, not fear. It was a signal. Inside the house, Frank's eyes snapped open. He didn't ask why. He just moved. By 3:30 a.m., the barn was alive with motion. Commander and Ranger were already forming a perimeter. Shadow had vanished into the treetops. Scout darted through the shadows like a whisper. Ghost, still weakened, lay beside Emily, who had fallen asleep with her head on his chest. Frank knelt beside them. "It's time." Emily opened her eyes without confusion, without tears, like she had always known this moment would come. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood, took Ghost's collar in both hands and whispered, "Protect them." And then she followed her grandfather out the back door. At 3:39 a.m., the first truck came through the fence line, not Clyde's silver pickup, not the faux FBI SUVs. These were black military vehicles with no markings, no headlights, no warnings, just speed and silence. Wilson had warned Frank something big was coming, but even he hadn't expected this. Not this fast, not this ruthless. The attack wasn't just tactical, it was personal. Frank moved with practiced speed through the crawl space that led to the hidden storm shelter. Emily climbed down behind him, her flashlight trembling only once. As they reached the bottom, Frank turned to her. "You stay here. You don't open this unless I knock 4 times. Got it?" Emily nodded, then added quietly, "They're not coming for the dogs anymore." Frank's heart skipped. "They're coming for me," she said. Outside, the barn exploded in flame. A flash grenade had ignited the hay. Fire raced up the old beams like it had been waiting for permission. But Commander was already ahead of it. He led Scout and Shadow into a flanking run, darting into the woods, circling wide toward the rear of the invading vehicles. 2 men stepped out wearing infrared goggles and automatic weapons. They didn't expect the speed. They didn't expect the coordination. Scout leapt first, knocking. 1 flat. Shadow took the other's weapon before he could fire a single shot. In the distance, Wilson's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got incoming at the south field. Repeat, they've breached the perimeter." Frank's voice was calm as he responded. "Let them breach." Then he triggered the switch beneath the porch, an old minefield from the Cold War era. Not live mines, but pressure-triggered flares and smoke bombs. Chaos, Frank's kind of warfare. Meanwhile, in the burning barn, Ghost tried to stand. His legs shook. He staggered once, collapsed, then rose again. Outside, the wind shifted. He could smell them now. The scent of gun oil, rubber soles. Fear. He stepped forward, 1 limping step, then another. Then a growl rose in his throat, not from pain, but from memory, from something deeper. He limped out into the firelight and roared. The men closest to the barn froze. One turned his gun toward the white figure limping out of the flames. Ghost didn't slow. He charged, and behind him came Commander, Ranger, and Scout. It wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. Wilson's team finally arrived, lights off, tires silent. Real agents, real soldiers, ones Frank trusted with his granddaughter's life. They swept through the field like shadows, neutralizing the invaders one by one. But there were too many. Even with the dogs, even with Wilson. Frank saw it happening. In slow motion, one of the attackers broke away from the line, slipped through the side gate, heading toward the shelter entrance. Toward Emily, Frank ran, faster than he'd moved in years, but not fast enough. The man reached the storm door. He yanked it open. A beam of flashlight hit his face, and standing at the bottom of the steps was Emily. Not crying, not screaming, just holding Ghost's old collar. The man didn't even have time to aim, because Ghost hit him midair, jaws locked around his arm, dragging him backward. They fell into the mud together, a tangle of limbs and fury. Frank arrived seconds later. He didn't hesitate. The IU shotgun roared once, then silence. Emily didn't cry. She knelt beside Ghost, her small hands pressed to his ribs. He was breathing, but slow, too slow. Frank knelt beside them both, and for the first time since Vietnam, he wept. By 5:03 a.m., the flames had been contained. Wilson's team cleared the last of the attackers. No ID, no fingerprints, nothing traceable. Just silence and bodies and burned fields. Frank stood outside the house with Wilson, staring at the collapsed barn. Commander sat beside him, streaked with ash. They weren't after the dogs, Frank said. Wilson nodded. They were after the encryption key. Emily, she's the last link in that drive. The one Laura hid in the collar, it's just a failsafe. Frank turned to him, eyes hollow. She's the keystone. Wilson didn't answer. He didn't need to. That morning, as the sun rose over the smoldering fields, Emily held Ghost's head in her lap and whispered something only he could hear. A code, a voice print, a memory. And in that moment, the dog's body jolted slightly. From the old collar around his neck, a soft ping echoed. A light blinked. Data unlocked, a signal sent. Somewhere far away, a server activated, and men in polished suits who thought the fire had been buried felt it rise again. They left the farm at first light. No tears, no final glances, just silence, and the soft hum of the pickup engine as it turned onto Route 7, headed north. Emily sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in an oversized jacket, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. Ghost lay across the back seat, his body still recovering but eyes alert, fixed on the road behind them. Commander sat beside him, ever watching. In the truck bed, 2 duffel bags, 5 canteens, a rifle, and a box marked "Do not open until necessary." The USB drive inside, wrapped in tin foil and duct tape. Frank drove with both hands on the wheel, the radio silent, his face unreadable. Behind them, the Peterson farm smoldered. Blackened barn, burned-out fields. Memories turned to ash. Wilson had given them 12 hours. 12 hours before the federal cleanup crew arrived. 12 hours before official reports rewrote the night into something neat and forgettable. Power surge, a barn fire. No survivors except a farmer and his granddaughter who had already gone visiting in Ohio. The world wouldn't know about the raid, about the dogs, about Emily. Because if it did, they wouldn't be able to run fast. Enough. Somewhere between Elizabethtown and Cincinnati, Emily spoke for the first time in hours. Pop, pop. Frank didn't take his eyes off the road. Yeah, Pumpkin? Why did Mommy never tell us what she really did? Frank exhaled slowly. I think she wanted to protect you. Maybe she thought if you didn't know, you'd be safe. But I still wasn't. No, Frank said quietly. You weren't. Emily looked out the window. The trees were turning orange, gold, red. The world looked like it was on fire. Again. She wasn't just someone who worked at a desk, was she? Emily asked. No, Frank said. She was a handler, a communication tech, a protector. She loved dogs. She trusted dogs, Frank corrected. More than people. Emily thought for a while. Ghost showed me her once. In a dream. Frank glanced sideways, eyes tight. What was she doing? She was running, and she gave something to Commander. Then she told Ghost to find me. Frank gripped the wheel harder. She knew she wouldn't make it, didn't she? I think she did, Frank said. And she made a plan. Emily opened her sketchbook. The last page. A picture of Laura kneeling before Commander. In her hands the collar, in the background a fire. And behind it all, Emily, just a shadow in the trees. She didn't hide the drive in the collar to protect herself, Emily whispered. Frank nodded. She hid it to protect you. At mile marker 112, they turned onto a gravel road marked only by a faded sign. McRae Wildlife Reserve. Wilson had arranged everything. A cabin hidden at the edge of an old ranger station. Solar-powered, off-grid. No phones, no cameras, just quiet. The moment they arrived, the dogs fanned out. Commander patrolled. Ranger dug a fresh lookout point. Shadow disappeared into the trees. Scout stayed close to Emily. Ghost slept, but his breathing was steadier now. Emily explored the cabin slowly, touching each object like it might speak. A framed photo of Wilson with his unit. A wood stove with a half stack of kindling. A journal. On the desk with the initials LP etched into the leather. Frank picked it up. Opened to the first page. Laura's handwriting. "If you found this, I didn't make it." He sat down. Emily watched him. He turned the page. Commander carries the encryption. Key. Ghost carries the trigger. Emily carries the truth. If they find her, they find everything. Frank looked up. "She planned this," he said. "All of it." Emily climbed into his lap. She was still so small, just 6 years old, but her face carried the weight of generations. She didn't want to fight them with guns, Emily said. "No," Frank said. She wanted to fight them with proof. That night, as wind howled through the trees and the temperature dropped, Frank sat on the porch. "With Commander, you know what's coming, don't you?" Frank asked. Commander didn't move, just stared into the darkness. Then he stood and nudged the box at Frank's feet. The one marked, "Do not open." Frank hesitated, then opened it. Inside, the USB drive, still whole. Beside it, a flash drive Wilson had sent earlier that week. He slotted both into the old laptop inside the cabin. The screen flickered. A secure portal appeared. "Password required." Frank looked at Emily. She stepped forward, and without hesitation typed, "Mother knew." The screen unlocked. Lines of data scrolled by, videos, documents, emails, evidence of bribes, executions, government officials working with cartels, bank records tied to encrypted biometric signatures. The last file? Testimony draft LP. Frank clicked. Laura's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. But the truth still has teeth, and I'm betting on the people who don't run from the fire." Outside, the dogs sat in formation, waiting, and, somewhere deep in the dark, a signal activated, a ripple across systems long shut down, and someone somewhere whispered, "They're not dead." Two months later, the first snowfall dusted the rooftop of the ranger cabin. Emily sat at the window, legs tucked beneath her, sketchbook in her lap. Outside, Commander patrolled the tree line, steady and tireless. Scout chased leaves. Ranger slept under the porch. Shadow? Nobody had seen him all day. Ghost lay beside Emily's chair, head on her slippered foot. His scars were still visible, but softer now, healing like the land around them. Frank chopped wood at the edge of the clearing. Every few minutes, he looked up, scanned the horizon, then went back to work. Routine, discipline, magic, he once called it. Inside, a small modem blinked under the desk. Wilson had installed it last week. One-way encrypted connection. No incoming traffic, just outgoing. Just enough to transmit what they'd uncovered. Every few nights, Frank uploaded another file. Evidence, testimony, truth. He knew it might not be enough to change the world, but it was enough to start something. Emily called it the Library of the Lost. Each file, a piece of someone who'd been silenced, a soldier, a handler, a mother. That evening, as wind danced through the chimney and firelight, flickered across the cabin walls, Emily asked a question. "Do you think Mommy knew it would be me?" Frank looked at her across the dinner table. "I think," he said carefully, "that your mom knew this fight wasn't about force. It was about memory. And you, Pumpkin, you remember everything." Emily smiled slightly. "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts," Frank said. "That's how stories survive." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Do you think people will listen?" Frank squeezed gently. "Eventually. And if they don't, we'll make them." In a bunker 3 states away, a monitor came to life. A man in a gray suit leaned forward, watching as lines of code streamed across the screen. His assistant frowned. It's them again. The man didn't look away. Where's the origin? Masked, fragmented, military-grade cloaking. The man tapped the screen, paused the footage on Emily's drawing, a scan of Laura kneeling beside Commander. The assistant asked, "Do we engage?" The man shook his head. "Not yet, let the ghosts speak." He smiled faintly. They always do. And somewhere in Kentucky, in a quiet forest no one remembered, a little girl drew another picture. This time, it was her, standing in the middle of 5 dogs. Beneath them, a broken badge. Above them, a word written in crayon. Justice to be continued. Episode 2 coming soon.